Sir, may I sit in that corner just until the snow stops?
Get him away from me.
Please, sir. I won't touch anything.
Touch? You're stinking up my marble. You smell like something died in a dumpster. Give me that. Contract law? Did you steal it from a real student?
That was my mother's.
Then go get it.
Fetch! Mr. Brennan, that book is all he has.
Do your job, Walter. Film this, everyone.
Sir, page 30 of your draft, clause 14B. Read it before you sign.
What did you say?
Schedule C. Read who owns the holding company.
It begs, it reads, and it lies. Throw it out with its trash.
You'll lose everything in that contract. Everything.
72 hours later, that same CEO would search every shelter in the city for the boy he threw away. To understand what happened in that lobby, you have to go back 2 weeks to a public library on the east side of the city. Every morning at 9, a tall young man in a gray coat took the corner table by the window. The librarians knew him. He never raised his voice, never slept at the table, never left a mess. He read contract law the way other 19-year-olds read sports scores, hungry and fast and whispering the words to himself. His name was Bryce Owens. The library was the only address he had left. 3 years earlier, his mother Denise had been a paralegal at a downtown firm. The sharpest one on her floor, the attorneys admitted, even if her name never made the letterhead. At night, she would sit with her son at the kitchen table and open the thick handbook she carried everywhere, its margins crowded with her looping blue ink. Contracts are stories, she told him. Every word is a witness. Find the word that lies, and you find the truth. Then she got sick. And the insurance company found a word that lied. An exclusion buried on page 60 of her policy. One definition nobody had read until it mattered. The claim was denied. The savings went first, then the apartment, then the funeral took whatever was left. Denise Owens died in a county hospital bed, holding her son's hand, telling him to keep reading. So he kept reading. 16 when she passed, 19 now. And every page he turned was a conversation with her. The shelters filled up by 7 each night. The trains were warm but unsafe. Winter in this city did not negotiate. That was where Walter Briggs came in. Walter had guarded the Brennan Dynamics Tower for 22 years, long enough to remember when the marble was poured. One December night, he found Bryce folded behind the loading dock, blue-lipped and shaking, a book clutched to his chest like a life vest. Walter looked at him for a long moment. Then he opened the side door. "Corner behind the planter," he said. "Heat vent runs all night. Gone by 5. Promise me." Bryce promised. For 3 weeks, he kept that promise to the minute. Then came the Tuesday night that changed everything. A young associate from the deal team stumbled out of the elevators at 11, arms full of paper, exhausted and cursing. A misprinted draft went into the recycling bin by the elevator bank. $400 million of merger agreement, tossed away like a coffee cup. Bryce was not going to touch it, but the cover page faced up at him through the dark, and his mother's voice came quiet and certain. Every word is a witness. He read all night under his coat with a dollar store flashlight. Most of it was standard, clean, almost elegant. Then he reached page 30, clause 14B. The definition of ancillary intellectual property ran 9 lines, twice as long as it needed to be, wide enough to swallow every patent Brennan Dynamics owned. The clause pointed to Schedule C. Schedule C pointed to a transfer at closing. The receiving party was a company called Halcourt IP Holdings, registered in Delaware, owner unlisted. Bryce read it 4 times. The deal was not a merger. It was a harvest dressed up as a handshake. He could have said nothing. Warning the man meant losing the warmest corner he had found in 3 winters, and Bryce knew it. But somewhere in a county hospital, a machine had once gone quiet because nobody read page 60. He slid the draft back into the bin, took out his pencil stub, and began to write. He spent the next day rehearsing 1 sentence in the library bathroom mirror. He only needed 30 seconds of a CEO's attention. You already know what he got instead. The laughter. The word fetch. His mother's handbook lying open in the snow like a shot bird. He picked the book up. He dried each page with his sleeve, slow and careful, while the lobby watched through the glass and laughed. Then Bryce Owens turned his collar up and walked into the city, and did not look back. The building was not done taking things from people that morning. By noon, someone had reviewed the camera footage and found the side door opening at midnight, 3 weeks running. Walter Briggs was called upstairs. 22 years, the operations chief said, sliding a termination letter across the desk. And you traded them for a stray. Walter signed it without a word. On his way out, he left his radio on the counter, and his dignity fully intact. But something else had happened in that lobby, something nobody noticed at the time. When the guards grabbed Bryce, a scrap of paper fell from his pocket and skidded under the reception desk. A cleaner found it that evening and almost threw it away. It reached Charles Brennan's desk by accident, tucked inside a stack of messages. 5 handwritten lines. Clause 14B, Schedule C. Ancillary definition too broad. Transfer at closing. Who owns the holding company? Brennan read it twice and told himself it was nothing. He poured a drink. He answered emails. He read it again. The handwriting was small and ruler straight, the kind of writing that does not waste motion. At midnight, he called Eleanor Voss, his general counsel, the only lawyer he trusted to tell him ugly truths. Probably nothing, he said. Look anyway. Voss called back at 3 in the morning, and her voice had no sleep left in it. Charles, where did you get this? She had traced the chain, word by word, the way the note told her to. The definition in 14B reached past the deal's core assets and gathered in every patent the company held. Schedule C moved them at closing, automatically, no signature required, and Halcourt IP Holdings appeared nowhere else in the agreement. On paper, it was a stranger. If we sign, the patents walk out the door, Voss said. And Charles, this company is the patents. The buildings are just where we keep them. Brennan stood at his office window with the phone against his ear and the city burning quietly below. Signing was in 5 days. The board had already toasted the deal. Victor Langley had already drafted the press release. Who caught this? Voss asked. Which firm? I want to hire them. Brennan looked down at the lobby, at the corner behind the planter, and the night came back to him in pieces. The gray coat, the steady voice. Page 30, Clause 14B. Read it before you sign. The book in the snow, the word he had used, the one that now sat in his chest like a stone. Fetch. It wasn't a firm, he said quietly. He did not sleep. At 6, he was downstairs in a coat over his suit, asking a stunned morning guard which way the boy had gone. Nobody knew. Nobody had asked his name. The shelters had no record of a Bryce, because he had never made it inside one before the beds ran out. There was only a description, repeated like an apology. A tall kid, a gray coat, a book, because the clip from the lobby had traveled. Phone to phone, group chat to group chat, until a junior analyst at Halcourt Capital froze on one sentence and forwarded it upward, marked urgent. Page 30, Clause 14B. Read it before you sign. Brennan had 5 days to find a stranger in a city of 2 million. And across town, Victor Langley had just learned that someone had read page 30. Charles Brennan had built a $4 billion company on the belief that anything could be located, priced, and acquired. By noon, that belief was gone. He had visited 6 shelters in 5 hours. He had stood in lines of tired men, holding a photograph printed from security footage, feeling eyes measure his coat and his shoes and his guilt. Nobody knew the boy, or nobody would tell him. He had Voss buy time with the lawyers. 2 days of excuses, dressed up as due diligence. Langley's office answered with smooth concern and a fruit basket. Brennan read the card 3 times. Looking forward to Friday, Charles. Time kills all deals. It was signed with a fountain pen, and it read to him like a countdown. It was the 7th shelter director, a small woman with a tired voice, who finally said it. You're asking strangers. Ask whoever fed him to your heat vent. The kid trusted somebody. It sure wasn't you. Walter Briggs lived in a narrow brick house with a flag on the porch and 22 years of loyalty folded away in a drawer. When he opened the door and saw the CEO of Brennan Dynamics standing in the cold, he did not look surprised. He looked patient, like a man watching a storm finally arrive. Mr. Brennan. Walter, I need to find him. Funny thing, Walter said. 3 days ago, you wanted him gone. Now you want him found. The boy's worth more than your deal, and you don't even know his name. Then give me his name. Walter let the silence sit until it hurt. You don't deserve to find him, he said at last. But it's 9 degrees tonight, and he's out there. So I'll tell you where he reads. Not for you, for him. He pulled on his coat. And I'm coming with you. He sees your face alone, he'll be gone before you cross the room. What neither of them knew was that another search was already underway. In a glass office across town, Preston Cole, chief counsel of Halcourt Capital, was studying the lobby clip frame by frame. Find the boy before Brennan does, he told 2 associates. Offer him whatever it takes. A kid who sleeps outside will sign anything for a warm bed. I want that clause forgotten by Friday. The library on the east side smelled of old paper and radiator dust. Brennan saw him from the doorway. The gray coat hung on the back of a chair, and the tall young man from the lobby sat at the corner table between 2 small children from the shelter around the block. He was teaching them to read, not from a picture book, from a rental agreement. This word here, Bryce was saying, means the landlord has to fix the heat. Circle it. When somebody tells you that you have no rights, you show them the circle. Brennan stood there, a man who employed 9,000 people, and discovered he was afraid to interrupt. It was Walter who crossed the room first. Bryce rose, and the 2 of them held on to each other for a moment, and the boy said something quiet that made the old guard laugh and wipe his eyes. Then Bryce saw the man by the door. His face did not harden. It simply closed, politely, like a business shutting for the night. Mr. Owens, Brennan said. Bryce, my counsel reviewed Clause 14B. You were right. You saw what 11 lawyers missed, and I threw you into the snow for it. He set his checkbook on the table. Name a number. Any number. I owe you that. Bryce looked at the checkbook. Then he closed it gently and slid it back across the table, the way a teacher returns a wrong answer. I can give you everything, Brennan said. You already took the only thing I asked for, Bryce said. A warm corner. I don't want your everything, Mr. Brennan. I want respect, not rescue. There's a difference. My mother taught me to read it." The radiator ticked. The two children watched over the tops of their chairs, sensing, without understanding, that the man in the expensive coat was the one asking for shelter now. "Then tell me what respect looks like," Brennan said. Bryce took a folded page from the handbook and smoothed it flat. He had written 4 lines, small and ruler straight. He read them aloud, evenly, the way his mother used to read terms into a deposition record. 1. You apologized to me in your lobby in front of the same people who laughed. Same floor, same hour. You say my name when you do it. 2. Walter Briggs gets his job back, with back pay and a formal apology in writing. He is not a security cost. He is the only person in your building who understood what it's for. 3. I don't take gifts. You give me a real position on your legal research team, with a salary and a performance review like anyone else. The day I stop earning it, fire me. 4. You read my mother's handbook. Every page, every note in the margins. You want to know who saved your company, Mr. Brennan. It wasn't me. He folded the page once and set it between them. Those are my terms. They're not negotiable. You, of all people, should appreciate clear drafting. For a long moment, the most powerful man in the city read 4 handwritten lines as carefully as he had ever read anything in his life. Then Charles Brennan, who had not been told what to do since his father died, said, "Agreed. All 4. He extended his hand. Bryce did not take it right away. He looked at the hand, then at Walter, who gave the smallest nod a man can give. 3 winters had taught Bryce that promises were cheap and warmth was expensive. But his mother had taught him something else, too. People read contracts. Contracts also read people. Then Bryce shook it, once, firm and brief, a closing without champagne. The apology happened the next morning at 9, the same hour the snow had stopped 3 days earlier. Word had gone around the building that the CEO had called everyone to the lobby, and the lobby filled with the same suits, the same receptionists, the same junior analysts who had filmed and laughed. Walter Briggs stood by the planter in a crisp, new uniform. Beside him stood Bryce Owens, gray coat clean, his mother's handbook under his arm. Brennan did not use the microphone they had set up. He wanted to have to raise his voice. 3 days ago, in this lobby, a young man asked me for a corner out of the cold, he said. I called him trash. I threw his mother's book into the snow. Some of you laughed. I made it safe for you to laugh. That was the worst thing I've done in this building. And I once fired a man on Christmas Eve. Nobody laughed now. Phones were out again, but the hands holding them were uncertain. His name is Bryce Owens, Brendan said. Say it carefully, because you'll be hearing it. While we walked past him every morning, he found the clause that would have gutted this company. 11 lawyers billed us $4 million and missed it. A 19-year-old read it once, in the dark, for free. So I am sorry, Bryce, for the snow, for the word I used, for every door this building closed on you while you were busy saving it. He turned. Mr. Briggs, 22 years. Welcome back. Then Brennan did the thing nobody filmed properly because nobody believed it was happening. He bent down, picked up Bryce's worn duffel bag from the floor, and carried it to the elevator himself, the way a doorman carries luggage for a guest of honor. Your desk is on 19, he said. Legal research starts at 9:30. The clip was everywhere within hours. It crossed the city, jumped the industry channels, and landed on a screen in a glass office at Howe Court Capitol, where Victor Langley watched it 4 times without blinking. The boy from the lobby now had a name, a badge, and access to every file in the deal room. Langley set down his espresso, and his voice came out pleasant and cold. "Preston, get me everything on Bryce Owens, where he sleeps, where he ate, where his mother died. Everything." Because Langley understood something Brennan was still too relieved to see. The deal was not dead yet. And in 5 days, the kindest thing in that contract would be the trap. The 19th floor did not welcome him. Legal research at Brennan Dynamics was 11 associates from schools whose names opened doors by themselves. They had watched the lobby clip. They had also done the math. If a homeless 19-year-old could catch what they had missed, the clip was not just embarrassing for the lawyers who billed $4 million. It was embarrassing for everyone with a framed degree. So the welcome Bryce got on his first morning was a stack of boxes on his desk and a smile with nothing inside it. "Vendor contracts," said the senior associate, a polished man named Grant Whitfield. 200 pages. Renewals, mostly boilerplate. Flag anything unusual. It was scut work, the kind they gave interns to break them. Whitfield expected to get the boxes back untouched, or worse, covered in confident nonsense he could quietly forward to the whole floor. Bryce took off his coat, sat down, and read. He did not look up for lunch. He read the way his mother had taught him, pencil moving, lips silent, every word called to testify. At 6 p.m, he knocked on Whitfield's door and set down a single page with 11 lines on it, small and ruler straight. 11 problems. 9 were sloppy, the ordinary rust that builds up in old contracts. The 10th was a renewal that had been quietly auto-extending at a 4% increase for 6 years, which nobody had renegotiated. The 11th was the one that mattered. A logistics agreement with a penalty clause that activated if the company ever changed ownership, even partially. Buried, dormant, and pointed straight at the merger everyone had just escaped. If the Halcourt deal had closed, that one paragraph alone would have cost $2 million on day one. Whitfield read the page twice. Then he walked it down to Eleanor Voss without saying a word to anyone, which for a man like Whitfield was a form of applause. Voss called Bryce into her office that night. She had a reputation in the building, a calm that made people confess. She slid the page back to him across the desk. "Who taught you to read like this?" "My mother, Denise Owens. She was a paralegal." "Where did she practice?" "Kitchen table, mostly," Bryce said. Voss smiled, and then she did something she had not done for any associate in 15 years. She cleared the chair across from her desk, the one stacked with files, and told him that from now on, it was his. "You'll still do your own work," she said, "but when I read something important, you read it after me. 2 sets of eyes, yours and whatever your mother left inside them." The days found a rhythm, and the building, slowly, found its manners. Receptionists who had laughed in the lobby now said good morning, carefully, like people handling something they had dropped once. The 2 shelter kids came by on Thursdays after school because Bryce had asked for a library card as his only signing bonus, and the firm's law library was better than any branch in the city. Walter patrolled the lobby with his new uniform and his old eyes, and when he passed the corner behind the planter, he sometimes touched the wall, lightly, the way you touch a scar. Late one Wednesday, Brennan came down to the 19th floor at 10 at night with 2 paper bags of takeout because Voss had mentioned the new researcher never seemed to leave before the cleaners. They ate at Bryce's desk, the CEO on a borrowed chair, noodles steaming over a stack of indemnity riders. For 20 minutes, they talked about nothing. The cold snap, the elevator music. Then Brennan asked the question he had carried for a week. Why warn me? After what I did? You owed me nothing. Bryce thought about it, chopsticks resting. My mother died because nobody read page 60, he said. You were about to die because nobody read page 30. She would say it doesn't matter whether we like the people we save. We read for them anyway. Brennan looked at him for a long moment. She would have hated me. For a while, Bryce said. Then she would have fixed you. She fixed everything. Brennan kept the fourth condition last, the way a man saves the bill he is most afraid to open. He read Denise Owen's handbook at night in his empty penthouse. With a glass of whiskey he kept forgetting to drink. The book itself was nothing, a standard practice guide 10 years out of date. But the margins were a second book entirely. Her blue ink ran along every page, arguing with the text, correcting it, joking with it. Next to a chapter on liquidated damages she had written, the penalty is never the number, it is the fear of the number. Next to a section on good faith she had written, good faith is what powerful people call the things they have not been caught doing. And then, on page 212, between a clause about notice periods and a diagram of indemnity flows, Brennan found a line that was not about law at all. Teach B that being unseen is not being unworthy. Brennan closed the book. He sat for a long time in his lit window above the dark city, a man who had spent 30 years being the most visible person in every room, and he wept for a woman he had never met, at a kitchen table he had never seen, who had raised the boy he threw into the snow. The next morning, he did two things. He officially terminated negotiations with Halcourt Capital, citing material concerns with Clause 14B of the draft agreement. And he had the corner behind the planter cleaned, warmed, and fitted with a long oak bench, with a small brass plate that nobody explained to visitors. The board exploded. $400 million did not leave a room quietly. Two directors demanded an emergency session. The pension funds wanted calls. A director named Howard Pierce, who had championed the deal for a year, stood at the end of the long table and asked Brennan, in front of everyone, whether it was true that the company's strategy was now being set by, and he read the phrase off his phone with surgical contempt, a stray the CEO felt guilty about. No, Brennan said. Our strategy is being set by Clause 14B. The stray just happens to be the only one who read it. It bought him a week, no more. Pierce wanted the deal revived. Half the board agreed with him. The stock had been priced with $400 million of expectation inside it, and expectation, as Voss liked to say, is the only thing shareholders sue about faster than fraud. Langley, meanwhile, had not called. That was the part that kept Voss awake. Predators do not sulk. They circle. The first circle arrived on a Tuesday, wearing a beautiful coat. A woman introduced herself to Bryce in the lobby as a program director for the Meridian Opportunity Foundation. They had seen his story. They were moved. They wanted to offer him a full scholarship, housing included, at any law school that would take him. And, with his story, she smiled, they would all take him. She set the paperwork on the bench beside him. 11 pages, cream-colored, beautifully printed. Take your time, she said. Dreams shouldn't be rushed. Bryce read it on the bench, under the brass plate, while she checked her phone. It took him 9 minutes. The scholarship was real. The housing was real. So was Section 8, Paragraph 3, where the foundation reserved exclusive rights to his story, his likeness, and his cooperation in any media, legal proceeding, or public statement the foundation deemed beneficial. Cooperation. Deemed beneficial. He followed the definitions to the back page the way his mother had taught him, and found the foundation's registered agent listed in Delaware, at the same address he had memorized from Schedule C. He clicked her beautiful pin closed and handed the papers back. "Tell Mr. Langley the drafting was better this time," he said. "Section 8 still gives it away. If I sign this, I belong to Howe Court, and the first thing you'll deem beneficial is my silence about Clause 14B. Tell him I said no, and tell him I said it politely." The woman's smile stayed in place, but something behind it packed its bags. She left without another word, and Bryce sat alone on the warm bench for a moment, hands steady, heart hammering, understanding fully for the first time that the richest men in the city knew his name now, and not all of them wished him well. That night, Walter's wife May insisted Bryce come for dinner, the first of what would become every Sunday. The Briggs house smelled like roast chicken and lemon cleaner. May piled his plate like she was settling an old debt, and Walter told stories from 22 years of lobby duty until Bryce laughed so hard he had to put his fork down. For a few hours, there were no clauses, no schedules, no Delaware. There was gravy and a worn couch and a baseball game with the sound low. When Bryce left, May pressed leftovers into his hands and did not ask where he was staying, because Walter had already quietly fixed up the room above their garage, and the question answered itself on the porch. He lay awake that night, in a real bed, listening to a furnace instead of a heat vent, almost safe enough to believe it. Then Friday came, and with it, the answer to Voss's insomnia. It arrived at 8 in the morning by courier, addressed to the office of the General Counsel. 40 pages, immaculate. Howe Court Capital was suing Brennan Dynamics for breach of the exclusive negotiation agreement, abandonment of an executed letter of intent, and tortious interference. Total claimed damages of $60 million. Page 2 named the cause with care. The defendant terminated a binding negotiation on the advice of an unvetted individual with no legal credentials, who had obtained confidential deal documents while trespassing on the premises. By 9, the story was on every business channel, and it was not the story of a clause. It was the story Langley's people had spent a week feeding into the wires, photogenic and poisonous. Billionaire torches $400 million deal on the word of a homeless teenager he met in his lobby. One anchor held up the lobby clip. Another held up a quote from an unnamed Howe Court source, calling Bryce, with lawyered precision, the sidewalk consultant. On the 19th floor, the boxes of vendor contracts sat finished and neat on the corner of his desk, while Bryce read the complaint, front to back, twice, the city loud below the windows. They were not coming for the company anymore. They were coming for him. And on page 31 of their own lawsuit, Victor Langley had made the first mistake of his career. The stock fell 9% in a day, then 6 more by Wednesday. Numbers like that have a sound inside a company. Phones ringing differently, doors closing more softly, 9,000 people doing their jobs while reading headlines about whether they would keep them. The story had everything television loves. A billionaire, a homeless teenager, $400 million set on fire, allegedly, by a guilty conscience. Howe Court's media team fed the wires a new course every morning. By Tuesday, the phrase sidewalk consultant had its own graphic on 2 networks. By Thursday, a panel of smiling experts debated whether Charles Brennan had suffered, and one of them used the phrase with visible pleasure. A breakdown of judgment triggered by a viral shaming. Then they came for Bryce directly. A photographer camped outside the Briggs house and got his picture taking out May's trash, which ran under the headline, "From Garbage to Glory?" Someone leaked his mother's name, and a tabloid called her death a tragic spiral, as if poverty were weather. A business blog published his shelter intake records, which were supposed to be sealed and were not even accurate. Reporters called the firm's law library, asking if it was true the boy had a criminal record. He did not. By Friday, half the internet believed he might. Preston Cole's legal strategy was built on the same single hinge. On page 2 of the complaint, and in every interview his proxies gave, the same word kept surfacing: trespassing. The boy was trespassing when he read the draft. The documents were confidential. Therefore, the warning was stolen property. The termination was contaminated, and the $60 million claim stood on clean marble. It was elegant. It made the building's victim into its burglar. Langley himself went on television exactly once, which was all he needed. He sat in a studio armchair in a soft gray suit, sounding wounded and reasonable. "I admire the young man, truly," he said. "It's a wonderful story. But business runs on signed agreements, not on feelings." Charles broke his word. "If a court decides my counterparty can walk away from a binding commitment because a trespasser with no training frightened him, then no deal in this country is safe." He smiled with a regret he had practiced in a mirror. "I take no pleasure in this. $60 million is simply what a broken promise costs at our level." The clip ran for 2 days. It was, the anchors agreed, very persuasive. Voss assembled her war room on the 19th floor, and for the first time in his life, Bryce Owens sat at a conference table as the subject of a lawsuit instead of a footnote to one. She slid the complaint across to him, the way he had once slid a checkbook back. "They'll subpoena you. They want you in that arbitration room, under oath, scared. Cole will try to make you the thief in this story, so we prepare, starting with the worst question. Did you take that draft out of the building?" "No. I read it and put it back in the bin." "Did you copy it?" "I didn't have to," Bryce said quietly. "I remember it." Voss exchanged a look with Whitfield, who had begun, without anyone ordering it, to sit on Bryce's side of the table. A 19-year-old with no assets against the litigation department with 8 figures behind it, and the 19-year-old's whole defense was a memory and a recycling bin. For 2 days they drilled him. Whitfield played Cole, pacing, sneering, firing the questions they knew were coming. "Where do you sleep, Mr. Owens? What did you eat that week? Remind us what you were wearing in that lobby." The point of such questions is not information. The point is to make a witness feel small in front of strangers, because small people stumble. Bryce answered everything flat and slow, 20 times, 50. On the third evening, Whitfield dropped the act, looked at him and said, "He's going to underestimate you. God, I hope he does." Then Whitfield said something nobody expected. "There's a pattern here. Halcourt bought a censor company in Ohio 2 years ago. Founder sued afterward, claimed his patents had been moved to a holding entity before the ink dried. Case settled, sealed, gone. And a materials firm out of Pittsburgh, 18 months before that. Same shape. Acquired, stripped, shelled." Voss was already writing. 2 prior targets, same playbook. If we can tie Halcourt IP Holdings to Langley personally, the exclusivity agreement collapses. Fraud unwinds everything it touches. "Can we tie it?" Brennan asked from the doorway. "No," Voss said. "Delaware doesn't have to tell us who owns it. The 2 settlements are sealed. Langley's name appears on nothing. That's the whole point of him. The settlement offer arrived the next morning, and it was a masterpiece of cruelty. Halcourt would drop the entire claim. No payment. The deal could even be revived on improved terms. Clause 14b removed, everything transparent. Langley would absorb his legal costs and call it a misunderstanding between friends. There was one condition, printed in the middle of the page where it could not be missed. Brennan Dynamics would issue a public statement confirming that its termination had relied on a false analysis by an unauthorized individual who had unlawfully accessed confidential materials. The individual would be named. Trade the boy, keep the company. Pierce read it aloud to the board with something close to relief. It's a gift, Charles. The stock recovers Monday. We say one sentence about one kid and this nightmare is over. He'll land fine. People love him. The sentence is a lie, Brennan said. It's $60 million and the company your father built. Against a press release. Brennan looked around the table at faces he had promoted, enriched, and in 2 cases personally saved, and counted the votes he no longer had. I threw him into the snow once, he said. I won't do it again on letterhead. If this board wants that statement, you'll need a different signature. He stood. And you should all know, the analysis wasn't false. We have 11 lawyers who confirmed it. The kid's only crime was being right in a building where nobody else was. The board gave him until the arbitration ruling. If the $60 million stood, his resignation would be on the table with it. Something else happened that week, small and unreported. Engineers Bryce had never met began stopping by the 19th floor with coffee he had not asked for. A note appeared on his desk in unfamiliar handwriting. My team's patents were in Schedule C. Thank you. 9,000 people had done their own math, and it was not Pierce's math. That night, Bryce could not read. The words would not hold still, and the room above the garage felt suddenly borrowed, like everything else. He found Walter in the kitchen, and the old man took one look at his face, got his coat, and said, "Walk with me." They went to the shelter on Delmore Street, the one with the beds that always ran out. The night manager waved Walter through like family. In the common room, a dozen kids were doing homework under lights that buzzed, and a small girl named Tessa, one of his Thursday students, lit up and demanded Bryce inspect her vocabulary list immediately. He sat with her. He checked every word. And somewhere between the spelling of necessary and the spelling of receive, his hands stopped shaking. "They're saying you stole something," Tessa said, not looking up. "On the TV. Did you?" "No. I read something somebody threw away." "Then why are they being like that?" "Because reading it cost them $400 million. Tessa considered this with the gravity of a 9-year-old. "You should read more stuff," she concluded, and went back to her list, and Bryce laughed for the first time in 6 days. On the steps outside, Walter lit the one cigarette May allowed him per crisis. "I did 31 years between the army and that lobby," he said. "Want to know the whole secret of all of it? Stay when it's hard. That's it. That's the whole secret. Anyone can stand a post on a sunny day. What if I lose them the company, Walter? $60 million because I couldn't keep quiet in a lobby." Walter took a moment with that, smoke drifting through the cold. "Son, you didn't write that clause. You just refused to let it bite a man who'd been cruel to you. There are people in office towers who never once in their lives did anything that clean." He flicked the cigarette out. "You'll stay. You stayed when nights were 9 degrees. A conference room can't hurt you the way this city already tried to." The hearing was set for Monday, 9 in the morning. The arbitrator, retired Judge Margaret Hartley, was known for 2 things: She read every exhibit, and she despised theater. Cole filed his witness list on Friday at 5. The last name on it was Bryce Owens. Sunday night, Bryce sat at the small desk above the garage with the complaint, the exhibits, and his mother's handbook, reading the way she had taught him, even though he had done it 9 times. Every word is a witness, he kept hearing. He fell asleep at the desk a little after 1. He woke at 3 in the morning with a sentence burning in his head, and it was not from the complaint. Take your time. Dreams shouldn't be rushed. The cream-colored paperwork on the bench. The Meridian Opportunity Foundation. 11 beautiful pages he had read once, 9 minutes, 3 weeks ago. He closed his eyes and walked through them again, page by page, the way he could walk through anything he had ever read. Signature block. Back page, bottom left. Authorized officer of the foundation, a name in tidy serif type above a Delaware address. Tobias Marsh. He opened the complaint with both hands, suddenly very awake. Exhibit 4. The exclusive negotiation agreement itself, executed 8 months ago, with Halcourt Capital's corporate authorization stapled behind it. The lawsuit's own paperwork, sworn, certified, and filed by Preston Cole. Signature of authorizing officer, page 31, Tobias Marsh. The same hand, the same name. One man signing for the foundation that tried to buy his silence, and for the fund that was suing them. And, if his memory of one more document was right, for a third entity as well. The one nobody could open. The one waiting at the end of Schedule C in Delaware. Bryce sat very still in the lamplight, his heart going like a hammer, understanding what he was holding. Langley had hidden himself perfectly behind walls of paper. But paper has to be signed by somebody, and the somebody had been busy. He called Voss at 3 in the morning, and she answered on the second ring, because general counsels in crisis do not sleep either. "Eleanor," he said, "I know who owns the holding company." And Cole filed the proof himself. 60 hours before the hearing that would decide everything, the homeless boy from the lobby had just caught Victor Langley's empire in the act of signing its own confession. The arbitration room on the 40th floor of the Ashford Hotel was not a courtroom, but Monday morning it held more power than one. No jury, no gallery. One long table, 2 armies of lawyers, and at the head of it, retired Judge Margaret Hartley, who set a worn fountain pen beside a stack of exhibits she had visibly read. Outside, 40 reporters waited by the elevators. Inside, Victor Langley sat flanked by Preston Cole, wearing the soft gray suit from television, and the patience of a man who had already counted his money. Cole's morning was flawless. The exclusivity agreement executed and binding. The letter of intent signed by Brennan himself. The termination, abrupt, unilateral, $60 million of Reliance burned. And the cause, he said, pausing so the word could find every chair, a trespasser. A young man with no degree, no training, and no authorization read documents he had no right to see. My client lost a deal to gossip from a recycling bin. Then, after lunch, he called the gossip to the stand. Bryce Owens walked to the witness chair in a plain navy tie May Briggs had pressed that morning, carrying nothing. He had asked Voss if he could bring the handbook. She had said no, you won't need it. And she was right. But his hand kept finding the empty place where it usually sat. Walter and May sat on hotel chairs in the hallway outside, because arbitration is private. And Walter said the boy should not have to ride home alone, win or lose. Cole started gently, which everyone in the room understood to be a blade. "Mr. Owens, Where were you living on the night of January 9th? Behind the planter in the Brennan Dynamics lobby. And before that? Shelters, when there were beds. The library until it closed. Trains. You have no law degree. No, sir. No paralegal certificate. No college. No formal training of any kind. No, sir. And yet a $4 billion company canceled a $400 million merger on your word. Tell me, did you take the draft agreement with you when you were removed? No, sir. I put it back in the bin. So we have only your memory. Cole smiled at Hartley. A homeless teenager's memory of a document he saw once, in the dark, 3 weeks ago. That is the foundation of their entire defense. Yes, sir, Bryce said. Would you like to test it? The room went still. Cole's smile thinned. Excuse me? Clause 14B. You have it in front of you. Exhibit 2, page 30. Bryce folded his hands. Ancillary intellectual property means any patent, patent application, invention, improvement, trade secret, technical data, or know-how, whether or not reduced to practice, owned, licensed, controlled, or used by the company or any affiliate, whether or not material to the business as presently conducted. He recited for 2 full minutes, comma by comma, the definition, the carve-outs, the cross-reference to Schedule C. Wow, 3 Howe Court associates followed along with their fingers on the page, like children learning to read. When he finished, nobody spoke. Judge Hartley looked down at her exhibit, then up, with new arithmetic in her eyes. The witness appears to remember the document, she said dryly. Move along, counsel. Cole moved along, but the floor had tilted, and on redirect, Eleanor Voss tilted it the rest of the way. Mr. Owens, in your own words, what does that clause do? It harvests. The definition reaches every patent the company owns. Schedule C assigns all of it at closing to an entity called Halcourt IP Holdings. Automatically. No further signature. Brennan Dynamics would have sold itself and woken up owning its office furniture. Objection. The clause speaks for itself. It does, Hartley said. Overruled. It speaks exactly the way he says it does. Voss lifted a thin folder. Exhibit 4. Claimant's own filing. The exclusivity agreement they are suing on with Halcourt's corporate authorization at page 31. Signed by an authorizing officer. Mr. Owens, would you read the name? Tobias Marsh. And this. A certified copy of the state charity registration for the Meridian Opportunity Foundation, which offered Mr. Owens a scholarship 3 weeks ago in exchange for exclusive rights to his story and his cooperation in any legal proceeding. Treasurer and authorized officer? Tobias Marsh. And finally, the formation filing for Halcourt IP Holdings, Delaware, obtained this weekend. The incorporator's signature, Mr. Owens. Tobias Marsh. Voss set the folder down. One hand, Your Honor. One hand signing for the fund that is suing, for the shell that receives the patents, and for the charity that tried to purchase this witness's silence. We ask the tribunal to direct the claimant to disclose the beneficial owner of Halcourt IP Holdings. Cole was on his feet. Irrelevant, confidential, and outrageous. Hartley took off her glasses. Mr. Cole, your client's claim rests on the premise that the termination was unjustified. If the counterparty to this merger secretly owned the vehicle receiving the assets, that premise has a hole in it the size of Delaware. Your client will answer, or I will draw every inference the law allows me to draw. She turned. Mr. Langley, who owns Halcourt IP Holdings? For the first time in the proceeding, Victor Langley looked at Bryce Owens, not at the tie or the cheap shoes, at the eyes that had read page 30 in the dark. Whatever he was searching for there, mercy or fear or a price, he did not find it. On advice of counsel, Langley said quietly, I decline to answer. The sentence landed like a verdict, because it was one. Hartley let the silence do its work, then nodded at Voss. Anything further for this witness?
One question. Mr. Owens, why did you do it? You owed Charles Brennan nothing. Tell the tribunal why you read, and why you warned him.
Bryce was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, he did not perform. He simply set it down, like the folded page of conditions, in lines that were small and ruler straight.
Mr. Cole asked, what qualifies me to read a contract? Here's my answer. My mother was a paralegal named Denise Owens. She got sick. Her policy had an exclusion on page 60, one definition, 14 words long. Nobody read it until she needed them to, and those 14 words decided she wasn't worth saving. She died in a county bed, teaching me the only inheritance she had. Read every word, because every word is a witness. You ask why a homeless kid read a contract in the dark? Because I know what an unread page costs. It costs savings, then apartments, then funerals. People in this room bill $1,000 an hour and call reading a privilege. It isn't. It's protection. I didn't warn Mr. Brennan because he was kind to me. He wasn't. I warned him because 9,000 people work in that building, and somewhere in it is a janitor with a sick wife, trusting that somebody upstairs read the rest of her benefits booklet. My mother wrote a line in a margin once. Being unseen is not being unworthy. I'm not the exception to this city, Your Honor. I'm just the proof of what it keeps throwing away. Nobody in that room ever agreed afterward on how long the silence lasted. Judge Hartley looked at her notes for a moment, and those nearest to her said later that she pressed her thumb briefly against her eyes. Charles Brennan sat in the second row through all of it, a party with no lines. He had buried a father, rung opening bells, shaken hands worth billions. Asked years later to name the proudest moment of his career, he never mentioned any of that. He said it was sitting still in a hotel conference room, listening to a 19-year-old explain what reading is for, and knowing every camera in the country was finally waiting for the right person. The ruling came Wednesday, 11 pages, fountain pen ink on the signature line. The claim was denied in full. The exclusivity agreement was unenforceable, procured through fraudulent concealment of the claimant's interest in the receiving entity. And on the final page, a paragraph nobody had dared hope for. The tribunal's findings, together with Exhibits 4, 9, and 11, would be referred to federal regulators and to the Bar Association regarding the conduct of counsel. Langley left through the lobby because there was no other way out. 40 cameras watched him wait for an elevator that took, witnesses said, 11 years to arrive. By Friday, the Ohio founder had petitioned to unseal his settlement. By Monday, so had Pittsburgh. Preston Cole's firm issued a statement, noticeable mainly for the words it avoided, and Tobias Marsh, the busiest signature in Delaware, stopped answering his phone. On the courthouse steps, a reporter shouted the only question that mattered. Brennan stopped, looked into the cameras, and gave the answer that would be replayed for years. The boy I threw out saved every job in my building. Print whatever you want about me. Spell his name right. The war was over. What nobody expected was what Bryce Owens chose to do with the peace. Empires of paper burn quickly once somebody lights the right page. Within 6 months, the unsealed settlements from Ohio and Pittsburgh had given the regulators a map. And Tobias Marsh, facing the consequences of being the busiest signature in Delaware, decided he would rather be the most cooperative. Howcourt Capital was unwound fund by fund to pay back the founders it had stripped. Preston Cole answered questions before the Bar Association with none of his conference room music. And Victor Langley, who had built a career on never appearing in any document, finally got his name on thousands of them, all filed by prosecutors.
Nobody at Brendan Dynamics celebrated.
That was, everyone agreed, the strangest part. The stock recovered in a month. Howard Pierce discovered a sudden passion for spending more time with his family, and the company simply went back to work. 9,000 jobs intact, patents exactly where they belonged, in a building that now treated its lobby a little differently. Because the corner behind the planter had become something nobody planned. The oak bench stayed. The small brass plate stayed too, and visitors finally learned what it said because a business magazine photographed it for a cover story. Everyone deserves a warm corner. Security guards kept a quiet new custom there. When someone came in from the cold, they got 10 minutes and a coffee before anyone asked them anything. Walter trained every new hire himself, and his first lesson had nothing to do with cameras. "You're not guarding the building from the city," he told them. "You're guarding what this building learned." On a bright Saturday in June, the lobby filled again, the way it had for an apology. This time, there was a ribbon. The Denise Owens Legal Literacy Fund opened with 3 storefront clinics and 1 promise. Anyone could walk in with anything they had been told to sign, and someone would read it with them. Every word free. Lease agreements, insurance policies, benefits booklets, the fine print that decides, quietly, which families stay above water. Brennan endowed it personally and asked for nothing on the wall but her name, written the way she wrote it, in looping blue. The clinics paid for themselves within a year, in the only currency that mattered. In October, a volunteer reading a young father's insurance policy found an exclusion on page 61, one definition wide enough to deny the claim his family would need by spring. They caught it in time to switch carriers. The father never knew the history he had walked into, but the volunteer did, because Bryce had trained every reader on the same example. And when she got home that night, she cried and could not fully explain to her husband why. The fund's first annual report ran 1 page. Families served, 2,100. Clauses caught, 312. Lives quietly unbroken, not counted, because they never had to know. The first clinic classroom was not a storefront at all. It was a room at the Delmore Street shelter. Fresh paint and warm light and shelves Walter built by hand, with a sign over the door that May had to read to her husband twice before he believed it. The Walter Briggs Reading Room. The old guard stood under it for a photograph, ears red, while a dozen kids cheered for him, and he said, gruffly, that it was a ridiculous amount of fuss. And then he asked May, quietly, to take one more picture. Bryce Owens stood at the back of that room and watched, and the feeling in his chest had no clause that defined it. His life had become a strange and busy thing. The scholarship offers had come on their own after the hearing, real ones this time, with no Section 8 anywhere inside them. He had read every word anyway, out of love for the habit, and chosen the state university across the river. Days at the firm, nights in class, Sundays at May's table, where his chair was simply his chair now, and the room above the garage had a bookshelf too heavy to ever move out. On his first morning at the university, a contracts professor asked the hall whether anyone could explain fraudulent inducement. Bryce raised his hand and kept the answer short. Word had gotten around by lunch anyway. The kid from the Langley hearing was in section 4, and he did the readings. At the firm, his title was still legal researcher. His performance review happened exactly on schedule because he had insisted, and Eleanor Voss wrote one line in the box reserved for overall assessment. He reads like it matters because he knows it does. Whitfield gave him the office gossip and half his caseload. The associates who had once handed him boxes to break him now lined up to have him break their drafts instead, and the ones who learned to enjoy it became, somewhere along the way, his friends. His desk sat by the north window on the 19th floor. If he stood, he could see straight down into the lobby, to the bench, to the exact square of marble where a CEO had once told him to fetch. Brennan returned the handbook on an ordinary Tuesday with no speech. He had kept it for 4 months, longer than any document of his life, and when Bryce opened it that night, he understood why. The margins had grown. Next to Denise's notes, in careful black ink that did not quite hide its nerves, a second conversation had begun. Page after page, questions, answers, arguments. And beside the line on page 212, beside "being unseen is not being unworthy," Brennan had written 4 words and signed nothing, because nothing needed signing. He learned. So did I. Bryce sat with the book open for a long time. His mother had spent her whole life reading other people's words for them. Now her words were being read. The handbook had been a survival tool, then evidence, then a bridge. It was finally just what she always meant it to be, an inheritance. Brennan changed in ways the magazines never found interesting enough to print. He still ran a hard company, but on the first Thursday of every month, a man in a plain sweater sat at the back of the Delmore Street reading room, taking notes like a student, and once a season, he taught the class himself. What CEOs Miss in a Contract by Charles Brennan. Attendance was always full. Tessa graded him strictly. The following winter, on a Thursday, the snow came back to the city. Bryce taught his class at the reading room that night, 14 kids and 7 adults, working through a used car loan that one of the mothers had brought in. Tessa, 10 now and ferociously literate, had appointed herself his teaching assistant and took attendance like a federal marshal. Afterward, while chairs scraped and parents zipped coats, she helped him stack the workbooks. And she asked the question all of it had been waiting for. What if you read everything and find the bad part and nobody listens? Like, what if you tell them and they just laugh at you? Bryce looked at her, and for a moment he was 19 and frozen in a marble lobby, holding 30 seconds of a rich man's attention in his bare hands, watching it drop into the snow. "Then you read it louder," he said. "You stand there, and you stay, and you read it again. Somebody in that room is listening. I promise you. It's almost never the person you're talking to, but somebody always hears it." Tessa weighed that, nodded once, and filed it away the way she filed everything, permanently. He walked home through the falling snow, past the tower. Through the glass, the lobby glowed gold. There was someone on the bench, a stranger in a wet coat, hands around a paper cup of coffee, and a guard standing near, not asking him anything. Bryce stopped on the sidewalk where he had once dried each page of his mother's handbook with his sleeve, and he watched the warm corner do its quiet work. And then he turned his collar up and walked on, home, where the porch light was always left on now, because May said the question of where he was staying had been answered
for good. The bench was never about furniture in the end. It was about what buildings and people decide to do the second time. Brennan got a second chance to see who was in front of him. Walter got his 22 years back, with interest, and a paralegal from a kitchen table who never saw her name on a letterhead got it on a wall instead, where every person who walks in unseen can read it. Every word is a witness. That was her whole case, and she won it. Here's a question for you to take with you. If you had 30 seconds to make someone powerful actually listen, what would you say? Put it in the comments. Somebody scrolling tonight might need your exact words. If this story moved you, share it with one person who feels unseen right now. And subscribe, because there are more stories like this one waiting to be read out loud. Every word. Because every word is a witness.
Real talk. I told this story because I've been the person nobody saw. Maybe you have too. The world will call you trash right up until the moment it needs what's in your head. Keep reading anyway. Keep showing up anyway. And when you make it, save somebody a warm corner.